My name is Drew Williams-Clark. I'm the Director of Equitable and Sustainable Communities here at the Metropolitan Planning Council. And I'm so pleased to be with you as part of the team that's come together on this event today, including both MPC and the Center for Neighborhood Technology, who are both partners in this project. MPC is an independent nonprofit organization that works to advance the sustainability, equity, and prosperity of the greater Chicago region. And I want to invite Jackie Grimshaw, who's going to be starting us off today, to introduce herself with me at this time. Morgan, I don't know if you can unmute her and give her a quick spotlight.
Good morning. I am Jackie Grimshaw, Vice President for Governmental Affairs at CNT. And on behalf of CNT and MPC, I want to say welcome to our event as well. CNT is a research and public policy organization that has been working at the intersection of equity and the environment since 1978. Today we're going to talk about CNT's and MPC's experience in creating this tool, and also our involvement with TOD legislation from almost from the beginning. And so, Morgan, if you could go to the first.
Jackie, I'm actually going to do a couple of quick housekeeping things first, and then we're going to go ahead and transition to the larger piece. But, all right. So I just want to go over what we can expect for today. First, I'll go over some housekeeping remarks to make sure we can all engage easily. I'll give a brief overview of each of our speakers, and then we'll have a brief presentation by Jackie, who's now spot-live as well, to set the stage about ETOD and give a foundational overview of the relevant information for today's presentation. Then I'll open up a poll for all of you in the audience to participate in, and the poll is basically going to shape the exact focus of today's tool demonstration. The demo will be moderated by myself and CNT's Peter Haas. After the demo, we'll have a few minutes to address logistical questions, followed by a rousing roundtable discussion moderated by MPC's CEO and President, Darlene Hightower. Darlene will ask a few questions of the panel and then open up the floor for live questions from all of you in the audience. You can share your questions with us in the Q&A function to make sure your question gets asked. And a couple of you have already done that. And just to note that, I can see that the live captioning has been enabled. So if you would like to use that, all you need to do is point your cursor on the low horizontal bar where it says CC live transcripts. If you click that, you'll be able to see a live transcription of today's speakers. Darlene will close us out at 1 p.m. with some final remarks, and we'll send you on your way to use the new Etod Calculator tool. So we can all engage easily. Here are a few housekeeping points. We've enabled the chat and the Q&A functions here on Zoom. You can find them both in the bottom portion of your screen. We ask that you use the chat box throughout the session to share your thoughts with us or to get my attention about anything at all. We also encourage you to use the Q&A function to post any questions so that we can easily access them and make sure that we're able to respond to any of your questions as they arise. The event will also feature live closed captioning, like I said. And on a final note, just want to remind everyone that the event is being recorded, and we will share a link to the recording and any relevant resources in a follow-up email. So keep an eye out for that. So I want to briefly just introduce each of our speakers, and then I will hand this over to Jackie to get us started on the presentation. So Morgan, can you show the speaker spotlights or the speaker photos real quick so I can just go through those quickly? Excellent. So we've already met Jackie Grimshaw. Peter Haas has a PhD and she's Chief Research Scientist at the Center for Neighborhood Technology. I am, as I said, Drew Williams-Clark. You've already met me. Our panelists today include Darlene Hightower, our CEO and President at MPC, who will moderate, as well as Aleman, Executive Director of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP, Sierra Boatwright, VP of Real Estate and Community Development at CRG, and Mike Thomas, Founder and Executive Director of the Garfield Park Community Council. We've already gone over our housekeeping points, so I think we can sort of skip past that, and I will hand over the presentation to Jackie, who's going to talk a little bit about ETOD and the progress that we've made on policy so far.
Okay, Morgan, would you put up the first slide for me, please. Okay. So I'm going to do a really brief history of TOD policy in Chicago. And transit-oriented development, of course, is a conversion of mixed-use development, housing, office, retail, commercial, within a walkable distance of either a quarter mile, a half mile of quality public transit. And 2013, there was a very limited opportunity for TOD. We had the first ordinance, which began to ease restrictions in station areas, allowing for more density. Chicago's ordinance identified properties with a quarter mile of transit or with a half mile on a designated pedestrian street. And most people don't even know what that was or is, but they were eligible to have their parking minimum reduced to 0 spaces. Unfortunately, housing with excellent transit access was priced out of low and even middle income residents. So the Todd ordinance was written to expand benefits for developers, but it didn't require or restrict the kinds of development that inhibit transit use. In 2015, the ordinance was expanded for further opportunities. And in 2019, it's when Elevated Chicago got involved. Elevated Chicago built this agenda around equitable transit-oriented development, which draws upon the transportation and densification benefits of Todd, while also requiring stakeholders to consider housing affordability, environment, and economic opportunity as development drivers. Elevated worked with 2 administrations to advance ETOD. In 2019, ordinance that we worked on expanded ETOD to high-frequency bus routes and mandated a policy plan. In 2021, the Etod policy implementation plan was adopted. And so we now have ETOD. We know it happens when city departments and the community work together. For example, Mayor Lightfoot set aside $10 million to support the ETOD policy plan and pilots, and in 2022 for the years 2022 and beyond. These dollars are in addition to other amounts set aside by the Department of Planning and Development, Housing, and the Chicago Department of Transportation to support ETOD priorities. And ETOD levels the playing field for communities across the city. There is a pipeline of ETOD projects that are ready to receive support. The 2022 pilots provided city investment for a range of projects. 11 pilots were selected by Elevated partners in the city. Additional projects are in Elevated's pipeline and across the city. Over $500 million in housing ETOD has been considered or approved by the City Council and the Chicago Plan Commission in the past 2 years. ETOD helps Chicago plan to become a city that works for everyone. And the ETOD 2022 ordinance is going to be introduced tomorrow that prioritizes people over parking, ends the ban on small multifamily housing near transit, and provides a safer, more walkable path to transit and expanded incentives for developers. So next slide. So it's important when we consider what's going on with ETOD that we understand that ETOD allows for people who need transit to enjoy the benefits of living nearby without the threat of displacement. ETOD is about locally owned businesses that build wealth for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. It's vibrant spaces where artists create, perform, and work in ways that reflect the community. Its options for getting around, including public transit, either bus or rail. Its streets, sidewalks, and paths that encourage exploration, promote health, and make people feel safe. It's easy to makes it easy to access healthy food and health resources. It's water management, shade structures, and other tools for climate resilience. It's open, clean, and welcoming so that everyone feels safe. It's affordable housing located near public transit. It's capital investment that brings jobs and value to those who live there. And it's urban planning with, not to community to community members. Next slide. So we really want to center the E in Etod today. So what is Equitable about Etod? ETODs are development projects built close to bus stops and L trains that make living in the area better for all, not just for some. It's accessible amenities and activities. It's housing, work, and play spaces. It doesn't price anyone out and is welcoming to everyone. And with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Drew and Peter. We're going to demonstrate the calculator for us this morning.
Thanks so much, Jackie. Once again, I'm Drew. I work at MPC. And Peter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Peter Haas. I'm the Chief Research Scientist here at CNT, and been working on these sort of tools for quite a while. So I'm looking forward to sharing this tool with everyone.
Awesome.
And
thanks, Pete.
while I say that, I'm going to hit share screen and go ahead and share my screen so we can see the site itself. Drew?
Yeah, great. So I just want to sort of set the stage a little bit, and we're going to do a quick poll. We created this tool to help residents, advocates, developers, and policymakers explore all the benefits that can happen, as Jackie just described, when ETOD is built in the right places and with the right features, such as those we've just discussed. So we want to start real quick by doing a poll. We want to ask a couple of questions, and then Peter's going to give a broad overview of the tool, and I'm going to sort of do a little choose your own adventure based on your responses to these questions. So the first one is, what best describes your role in ETOD? And we're going to make you choose. Sorry about that. Would you call yourself an advocate, a developer, someone in government, a resident, or something else? Just have to choose the one that's most important to you today. And number two, why would you use this ETOD calculator? You might say, I want to inform an alderperson about a specific project. You might say, I want to apply for affordable housing subsidies. You might say, I want to bring more affordable housing to my community. You might say, I want to understand the balance between housing and parking. And so I know that's probably not going to fit everybody in here, but you can sort of choose whatever you think is most interesting if it doesn't apply to you exactly. So we'll give that a couple seconds. And then Morgan, when you're ready, it'd be great if we could see the results. Okay, sorry. Is there anything I need to do to make sure that the results get? Sorry. Great. Yeah. So it looks like we got a sort of close tie between advocate and government, and as the leads, with other resident and developer sort of falling behind that. And then in terms of the sort of scenarios, the largest percentage is saying they want to bring more affordable housing to their communities, and that they want to understand the balance between parking and housing. Okay, that's great. So we're going to close that for now, and then Peter's going to share his screen and give us overview, and I'm going to do a little deeper dive.
Okay, I'm back to sharing my screen. And so I thought I would just start, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, but hit the highlights of what the tool is able to do. I would really encourage everyone to go to etod.cnt.org, and you can dive right in. There's a couple menu items on top that are very useful and helpful. What is EOTOD? Sort of review a lot of what Jackie just talked about. The user guide, I would really suggest for the first couple times or first time you go to really get a sense of how the tool works and what you could do. And then people and places is a couple examples, and that will probably grow as the tool matures, of some positive ETODs around the city and the county. So let's just start off by diving in and thinking I'm going to look at the Woodlawn Station development down in Woodlawn. And you know, you could either type the address in here, but I'm kind of a spatial person, so I like to go to the map. And I know it's right at the end of the green line, so I can just go in and I can just zoom in. You know, there's the ability to, I've clicked on a parcel. I think it might be there. And when I see it, I say, oh, well, that's not what I'm looking at. So I could say, oh, well, let's look over here. And that's the unit that the building that I want to dive into. So that tool, the street view and satellite, is very useful sort of to help you navigate and make sure you're looking at the right parcel. So once I do that, I can go back to the property details, and I see this is in the 20th ward. It's in Woodlawn. Gives me the PIN number. Tells me what census tract. Even tells me what zoning is that building is sitting on. And I can see what's nearby. So for instance, all the different the transit assets that are nearby, plus a lot of different amenities. This is useful in developing. So and one of the nice features is we can turn these things on the map. We could also see a list of those. And I'm just going to hit grocery stores real quick, and you can see here's that new jewel that's part of this whole plan development down there. So yeah, the other thing we can do is we can check out what the local officials, if you're going to want to bring it to the alderman, there they are, as well as state and county and national representation. And then our friends over at the Institute for Housing Policy at DePaul have developed a displacement pressure index that we expose as well. And you can see this area is pretty vulnerable to some displacement. And in fact, we can see that in this area where it's somewhat is vulnerable to displacement, the costs are moderate, but they're rising, the housing costs. So you can dive in and look at that a lot more and check that out as you go. One of the things, to go back to what the property details is, we noticed that when we picked a parcel, the way we designed the site is that you would always have a building on that site, just so that advocates who don't know what the building might be have something to work with. But I've done a lot of research. In fact, you can see all of these links open at the top of my my screen here this morning. I was digging in and seeing if I could find this building. And I wrote myself a little cheat sheet, and I want to change this because it's a different building than the default building that we built. Yeah, so there's 55, 56 units. I've gotten both answers depending on which website I look at, and so we can change that. But then we know, excuse me, we know there's 41 affordable units in those 55 units, and so if I open up this more detailed menu, I can change things. So one of the things is we know that there's no studios or 4 bedrooms. It's all 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. And like I said, there's 50 of them. So as I delete things, you'll notice these numbers change. But I've sort of decided what I would do. I didn't have a good breakout of what they were in terms of bedrooms. There was some market rate, but there's 41 affordable units. So I just decided I would just sort of distribute those somewhat evenly across here. And you can see now I've got 41 affordable units and 55 units. But then if I even want to dig in farther, and one of these articles, and I'm not going to try to go find which one, says that, you know, they're actually some of these are for low income, the HUD category of low income, and in fact 50% or below is what they're targeted at. and some are for the very low in the 60% range. So if I go in here and change these as well, and I will just I'll just change one, but you get the idea is that you can really dive in and change these to what exactly your building is going to look like. Yeah, so now I've got a pretty good profile of the unit types, and you know, we have 55, 41, 75% affordable, so we definitely meet the TOD ordinance. One of the other, you know, the Daily Restaurant, which used to be across the street, has moved into this thing, and there was a nice article about them, and they said there was 15,000 square feet of commercial space, retail space is how they defined it. So I'm going to change that too. If I knew that there was going to be some commercial space, maybe, you know, law offices or doctor's offices, or some industrial space and light industry might need to move it in, we could add square footage for those types of uses as well. But for now, let's just say that's our building, and we can go and take a look at what the implications of a building such as that would be in this neighborhood. But before I go there, I just wanted to show you that one of the interesting things is how is this neighborhood changing and what's been going on in the last 20 years. And so we have this nice graph, which really indicates the top three of this table, top three indicators, demographic indicators of this neighborhood. And there's plenty more, but we picked these top three just to sort of say, you can see median income is kind of going up, probably about with what it's going up in most of the county. Rents are going up faster, and the percentage of Black, Indigenous, and people of color is actually going down a little bit. It started off in 2000 at 7%, and now it's around in the high, almost 89%. So that can be useful. Lastly, I'll just go down to the community impacts, and you can see here we reiterate the building, the scenario that you know is either built or going to be built, and we can see some impact. So we can see, given the 55 units of that sort of breakout, you can see that there'll be 112 people. And one of the nice things about this feature is if I change this, you can see things change exactly as I go. So you can, if you're designing something, you might want to play around with that. You could change the affordability levels. One of the things that we know is that if you're in a TOD zone, is that you only need a half of parking space for every unit. So this is way over parked by default. So I'm just going to turn all this down, and another article I read said it was there's 39 spaces. And how does that distribute itself? Well, let's just say that we had 28 of those, so that we got our half, give or take, there, and we put the rest of them in the non-residential. So we can either scroll that up to 11, or we can just type it in explicitly, or use the little up and down. So what does that do? Well, that's just going to change the parking demand, and change some of these statistics over here, and tell you how this building would impact the community. Finally, there's some transit benefits. I won't spend a lot more time on this, but you can really see that you know, if we build in a place like this, you're within a half-hour transit ride, you have access to 411,000 jobs. And sort of to go back to what Jackie was talking about, how this is a good way to preserve employment and ability for people to work. With that, I'll switch back over to Drew, and you can explore the tool a little in a different way.
Thanks so much, Peter. That's awesome. I'm going to share my screen, and I am going to take on the persona of an alderperson. I'm going to, full disclosure, I have picked an address based on its displacement vulnerability, not based on any real context in real life. And so I'm going to ask everyone to sort of suspend your deep and probably passionate knowledge of city politics and city goings on, and explore a hypothetical scenario with me for the moment. So what I've done is I've picked 3301 West Belmont Avenue in Chicago, which isn't too far from the Belmont Blue Line station in Avondale. And I've already pre-populated the tool with this address, but that's all I've done so far. So I've gone ahead and done that. And if this is what you would see by populating that address. And now I'm going to scroll down to location, or like Peter said, you can also use these tabs up here to change your place on the screen that scrolls vertically up and down. So by putting in 3301 West Belmont Avenue, I have picked up a parcel, and I am assuming that as a government official that I have been sort of asked to do a public meeting on a development proposal in my ward. And that development proposal is a certain kind of building at this exact address. And I'm going to go through with you what that is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of tweak a few settings about this development proposal based on the fact that, based on the poll, I am really interested to see more affordable housing in my neighborhood. And I'm interested to understand parking balance at this building and what that might mean. And so I'm going to start by entering the address, like I just said, and then I'm going to click on displacement pressure. And so what you can see here is that according to the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University, this address is a place where there is a more vulnerable population, which just means people who are more vulnerable to displacement, that it's a high cost area and that costs are actually rising. And so this is a particularly vulnerable spot. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, and I am going to see the demographic trends reflect exactly what we might expect in that kind of a scenario, right? We've got rent and median income going way up, and we've got percentage of Bi-Pac population going down. So if I go down to community impacts, this is the pretend development proposal that I've just received at my desk. It's got 25 market rate units. It's got about 1,800 residential square feet and 17 parking spaces. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into these a little bit, and I'm going to say, okay, you know what? All of these are market rate, but I am going to make 10 of these 2 bedrooms into affordable units. I'm just going to go ahead and change that right there. And so you can just see how that's affected residents' purchasing power, and it's actually made it go up because people are able to spend more on the, let's say, grocery store on the first floor than they would have otherwise because they're not paying tons of their income on rent. You might also have seen local retail spending go up as well. And that's because of the same change in that configuration. I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to look at parking spaces because that is something that I'm also concerned about. And I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to put in, just going to sort of open up, sorry about that. I'm going to close this down for a second. And I'm going to look at what might happen. Oopsie daisy. I'm going to look at what residential parking used to start with. I think I had 17 there. I'm just going to put that back in. So if I open up what is the impact here, it's going to show me that right now, there are 31% of those spaces that are actually going to end up being used in this building. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually scroll that down to 10. And you're going to see about how many cars are going to be there, and it's going to reduce those. So in other words, I can now go back to this developer and I can say, you know what, based on what I'm hearing and what my concerns are in my community, I'm looking to see a development that's something more like this. And I can see all these benefits that would accrue from that particular kind of a development. And if I scroll up, I can go one further and I can actually create, sorry about that. I'm having some trouble scrolling today. I'm going to go back to property details and I'm going to click this little link icon here that says share. And it's actually going to give me a link that I can share with a developer, which it just created. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to paste it into an email. So that, to me, is a huge way to use this tool. It's to say, I've received this proposal. It's maybe not aligned with what I know my community needs. And I'm going to give feedback that really, this is more of the development that my residents are looking for right now. Can you work with me on that? And that's a really clear example of how we think this tool can be useful. And it'll show that developer exactly why. This is because of the actual parking utilization that we're seeing here. It's because it improves our local retail spending volume and has all of these benefits that we think are important in our community. So that's a really clear example for me of how this tool has a lot of power. And so I think we're about at the end of what our demo time would be. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and would love to answer any questions that might have come up over the course of the demo. I'm just going to real quick check the Q&A. I don't see anything there. And I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So you must be completely wowed by Peter and my demonstration. And I hope that everyone will get into the guts of this thing as soon as you possibly can. And we're obviously, Peter and I are both happy to answer questions offline whenever they might arise. You can reach out to either of us at MPC or at CNT at any time to do that. And with that, since there aren't any questions, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Darlene Hightower, our president and CEO here at MPC, who's going to take over moderating our distinguished panel.
Thanks so much, Drew. I'm, taking notes on what Jackie had to say. I'm riveted by Peter going through the tool, and then I'm looking at you go through the tool. I am so excited about this. I think it's really a game changer. Before I introduce the panel, some of the things that I wrote down, Jackie said that ETOD allows residents to enjoy the benefits of living near transit without the threat of displacement. And just listening to your overview, this feels like it's a real game changer for thriving communities because everything is involved with ETOD: health, wellness, economic opportunity, housing, accessible amenities, and being able to, walk to get those amenities. So I think that this is really a game changer as far as the work is concerned, and the tool is so helpful in arming people with the information that they need. And with that, I'm going to give a little bit more background on the great panel that we have today, and then we're going to jump into some questions. Want to remind people that they have the ability to put questions in the chat. We would love for this to be a conversation with you all as well as with our panelists. And I'm going to introduce them now. So first we have Sierra Boatwright, who is the Vice President of Real Estate and Community Development with CRG, which is a real estate and investment firm, and it's also affiliated with Clayco. And then before that, she was the Vice President for Real Estate Development and Inclusion with Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, and did some great work in the Pullman neighborhood while in that role. And she's also a Leadership Greater Chicago Fellow and a 40 Under 40 Crane Chicago Business Leader. I'm slacking, you're doing amazing. So glad that you're here. We also have Mike Thomas, who is the founding executive director for the Garfield Park Community Council. Mike has more than 15 years of experience in community organizing and community development on the West Side and also in San Francisco. The council works broadly on issues of housing and wellness and resident organizing and business development. And Mike has been steeped in the ETOD movement within the East and West Garfield communities. And then last but not least, we have Aleman, who is the Executive Director for the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP. And she has more than a decade of experience in both transportation and land use. Before CMAP, she was a vice president with Metro Strategies, which is a policy and advocacy consulting firm. And she's also had several leadership positions with the Illinois Department of Transportation. She too is a Cranes 40 Under 40 leader. And so I am just super excited to have all three of these fantastic panelists join us today. And again, please make sure to ask any questions that you have and put those questions in the chat. So I'm going to start off, because not everybody that's watching today is an expert in ETOD or data or any of those things, as you all are. But let's talk about a little bit of background. So why would a tool like this be needed? What's the significance of it? And I'll start with you, Sierra, and then come to you, Erin.
Sure. I'll put on my OCNI hat to address that. I think when we think about holistic development, I think about housing. I think about retail development. I think about how we support entrepreneurs. I think about large, robust industrial development. I think holistically about development. And so often when we're doing engagement and thinking about master plans, tools like affordable housing always come up. And so I could give a concrete example. Working in Pullman, I did my very first affordable housing deal. I had never used LIHTC before, never applied for LIHTC before, and I found that process to be somewhat overwhelming. And this is someone that's done a lot of real estate development. Thinking about the Etod tool, it basically allows me to aggregate data from a lot of different sources, as opposed to me going to 15 different sites to say, hey, as I'm exploring different sites, which site would be best for this affordable housing development? Which site would be best for this development? How do I make sure that it's transit oriented? How do I make sure that it's accessible, and really think about site selection in a far more equitable way? And so from my experience, being able to pull important data, right, to even get to a low-income housing tax credit application, this tool was just, it's perfect and it's timely, and it keeps me from going to 16 different sites to pull this critical information to move financing applications forward. And so for that reason, when I think about holistic development, when I think about authentically engaging, when I think about responding to the needs of affordable housing, this is a tool that I found to be incredibly useful for the early stages of my application.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one of the things that I thought was really neat about the tool is not only can you obviously like pop in and address and get data across a lot of different spheres, but it allows you to input specific information and data based on your own needs. And the fact that you can, click on a link and be able to send that information off is a real game changer.
That's right.
Erin, I want to turn to you and get your thoughts on this too. We're just, talking about just some general background on why a tool like this is important and what kind of problems it would solve.
Yeah, I sort of see two ends of a spectrum here, right? Is that we have a huge infusion of federal dollars coming to the state, and it allows us to be better prepared for accepting, for operationalizing, for understanding where there are opportunities to apply that funding across our region in meaningful ways, and make sure that, the places where it is applied allow for good transit access across the region. That's thinking about things like Sierra mentioned, like the affordable housing. But I think on the other end of the spectrum, I really see this tool as being helpful to transparency for the public, right? It's empowering people and giving them the tools that they need to help educate their leaders about why some of these things matter. And I think at the same time, I've done a lot of community workshops early on in my career where we were trying to explain why, sometimes in a city as big as Chicago, a single-story building isn't going to have all of the things that you want in it, because from a developer's perspective, the math might not pan out, and you might need more tax credits than are available. So it helps, I think, unveil a lot of those things that go into these fancy pro formas in a way that's really meaningful for the public to get engaged and understand what can be that future possibility in their communities.
Yeah, I'm just taking notes as you all are talking, and the word transparency stuck out for me. This idea of holistic development and aggregated information in one space. Mike, I want to come to you as well. Like, you are a community organizer extraordinaire and have been doing some really great work in Garfield Park. I know that you've been involved in something called Garfield Green. So can you talk a little bit about that project and how you use the ETOD tool to support some of that work?
Yeah, thank you, Darlene. I just want to start off by just saying congratulations to the CNT and Darlene, your team at MPC on this tool. It's amazing. We had the chance to use this tool, earlier version of this tool, on a development in our industrial corridor. But to answer your question specifically, Darlene, around the Garfield Green project, this is a development that POA's proposed, and we've been working on through 2 administrations and over 3 years. It's 43 units of affordable housing. It's 2 blocks away from the blue line. It's 4 blocks away from the green line, near 3 bus lines. It's got 15 parking spots, 35 bicycle spots. I liked on the tool how they kind of show the different AMIs for the different composition of the project. And here too, 30% to 80% AMI. It brings a bunch of retail space that we sorely need in the neighborhood. Also community meeting spaces. We just don't have enough places to meet and develop that social cohesion. So we're just excited about this project. If I may, I'll just add briefly, it's an all electric system, no fossil fuels servicing the ovens, the heating in the building. Solar is handling the majority of the load of the project. And then finally, through community engagement process, the local community brought Black history, Black culture, and incorporated that into design of the building, the facade of the building. And a portion of the development fee will go to a community fund. Darlene, if I may just go back to your question that you asked before to Aaron and Sierra. I mean, one thing that's also, I think this tool is really exciting is agitation. I don't know about you guys, but when I saw Peter and Drew had that chart that showed incomes are going up, rents are going up, but people of color are going down, that pissed me off, so using this tool to agitate our residents, to get them excited about building a base, building power, to propose a project, support a project, but also help improve a project that might be proposed, I think is another way of using this tool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's real talk, right? Because at the end of the day, one, you want tools that people can access easily and get information, but two, it arms them with the ability to advocate and to make change within their own communities. You also use the phrase social cohesion, which I love because it's a thing, and I can see how ETOD would be helpful for that too, because you're really making spaces that are walkable, where business is there. Like it's making a community thrive, and that lends itself to social cohesion, and that lends itself to overall health and wellness for a community as well, which is super important. So I want to switch gears a little bit and ask if you all think this tool can create financial incentives to invest in underserved communities. And Aaron, I'll start with you first and Sierra, and then we'll round out this question with Mike.
Well, I think it can help support creating financial incentives, right? So we've been really digging in on what's going to be available to our state and region around the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And the law itself devotes over $324 million more in statewide funding for transit improvements over the next 6 years. So that's a lot of resources. And I think while there's transit across the state, the majority of it is here in the Chicagoland region. And I know this tool specifically focused on Chicago, but again, it can help be sort of that North Star for understanding where there are those opportunity areas for investing in transit, where we're looking at either building wealth and communities. Our team is working with Elevated Chicago on a couple station area plans as well. And I think as we've dug into working with the communities and the resource groups that we have and all of the public agency stakeholders there too, right? It's working together to sort of identify how do we prioritize our limited, well, it seems like increased at this point in time. Transportation investments cost a lot of money, but how do you really sort of focus those resources in the places that need it the most, and working together with a tool like this, with the public sector and with the community residents around station areas, I think is going to be one of those ways that we can help create those priority investment areas.
Yeah,
and I'll just add
go ahead,
to just piggyback off of Aaron, spot on. I totally agree with all that. And when I think about using this tool and using it widely, not only are we able to ensure that we're thinking about affordable housing in gentrifying neighborhoods, but we're also highlighting that our underserved neighborhoods are viable and they deserve investment. And we're using real data to make a compelling case. And so working on the far south side, I have found that this tool has been incredibly helpful to make that compelling case, right? I'm using real numbers. I'm using real data to say, hey, these communities have been looked over far too long. Let's just look at numbers. Let's look at leakage. Let's look at incomes. Let's look at real numbers that matter to show, hey, this neighborhood deserves investment. We can layer different tools to bring holistic development in this area, whether it's infrastructure dollars, whether we're talking about new market tax credits, whether we're talking about TIF. I can use real data to make a compelling case, right? And numbers don't lie. And so I think that when we think about how to use the tool, I think it's so important for us to acknowledge that this tool can be used across communities, not just underserved communities, and not just neighborhoods that are on the brink of gentrifying or those that have already gentrified, but all of our communities, suburban as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And as you're talking, I wrote down our underserved neighborhoods are valuable. So there's always this narrative of what is or is not within West and South Side communities. But the reality is that data can counteract that narrative. If you make it available to developers and they see, that value, then perhaps that can be persuasive for them to invest. Mike, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think the tool can create financial incentives for folks to invest in underserved neighborhoods?
Yeah, thanks, Darlene. I think I want to build off of what Sierra was saying. I absolutely do. And what Aaron was also mentioning, I do think hopefully it would help out with perceptions and biases that developers and retailers have. I remember years ago, and I wish we had this tool then. I remember years ago talking to a retailer, a commercial developer, and he threw up a neighborhood on the north side. And I was caught flat-footed. We were caught flat-footed. He's like, we have a 24-hour business model, and when we look at the numbers here, but then we went back to the office and we looked up what we could pull together on that neighborhood that the developer mentioned on the north side. And in fact, we had the same numbers, but it's a perception bias issue. So if we would have a tool like that, I do hope, I think Sierra was touching on this, I do think it would help bring more financial incentives to the neighborhood on the west and south side.
Yeah.
And can I just add one more piece to that, Darlene? I think there's something powerful about ensuring that residents have access to this tool. Like, it's important for developers, it's important for municipalities, but there's something really powerful about providing tools like this to stakeholders, those residents, those community groups that you're hoping to gain support from. You want to ensure that you're responding to their needs in a respectful way. You're empowering them with real data so that we can say, hey, these are our challenges or these are our strengths, but at the end of the day, these are the numbers that we're working with. These are our opportunities. And so I can't stress enough that piece as it relates to the tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. Like, there's nothing more powerful than a resident that's armed with data and information. Watch out.
Right.
Mike, I want to circle back to you because there was a question in the chat about the Garfield Green project, and folks are asking, will that project bring more healthy food resources to the community?
Oh, thank you, Darlene. I wasn't following the chat, so thank you for doing that. Yeah. So yeah, we at the developer and the community, we have there's several working groups of the development team help create, and we did do a retail assessment survey, and absolutely the number one thing that folks want to see in that retail space is some fresh food options. So we're all working hard on trying to bring some fresh food. We hope to break ground later this year on that project. It's passed all the city approvals. They're selecting their GC right now, general contractor now, and hope to be back in front of city council early this summer and breaking ground later this summer, this fall.
Thank you for that response. So Aaron, can you talk to us a little bit about how other municipalities in Northeast Illinois are making plans, policies, or investments in ETOD? We've been talking about the tool, but let's broaden it a little bit and talk about ETOD. And if they are doing that, what can we learn from them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think there are a lot of communities that are really focusing on their transit-oriented centers. Now, I'll say there have been some changes in the marketplace, right, with less people taking transit and rethinking like what your downtown transit station hub might look like. But in many opportunities across the region, we've been seeing sort of a revitalization in their historic downtowns. I think as planners, we're often sort of have been thinking about like these historic downtowns were really built around transit centers, and it increases property values, and the retail that's there can be small business owners, and it's really that sort of strong Main Street success that you see. So we're seeing the mayors that I talk to across the region are seeing more downtown daytime business, because if people are working from home a couple days a week, you've got that nexus of needs that are happening. So I think we've seen a lot of investment in places that want to upgrade their station houses, that really want to make sure that that's a meaningful part of their community. And I think the same can be true in the stations in the city of Chicago, right? Is that these are the hubs, these are the places where you could stop by and get, a sandwich, groceries, have a small business there that really can help support the community in a more meaningful way. And I think, I just wanted to get back to, I think, what Sierra and Mike were talking about a little bit earlier about sort of the perceptions and the bias too, and understanding that in Chicago and in across our region, our competitive advantage is our transit system. And I think being able to show people how much it costs to have parking around stations, and how much that adds to the cost of maybe apartments or condos being unaffordable, right? If you can take that cost out of the building development pro forma, and because you have access to transit and that access gets you to what I saw Peter, the one example, he had 400,000 jobs within a 30-minute transit ride. That's powerful stuff. So I sort of went from the region back to the city, but I do think, again, that those are the reasons why the places around our transit stations should be important and should be invested in more.
Yeah, and you actually, with that response, raise another question that I have here, and that is, when we talk about ETOD, we often talk about affordable housing, but what are we overlooking on the transit side of things? Where are there connections to the transit area and issue? And you started to talk a little bit about that, so feel free to opine more.
Well, I think, again, it's our transit system is, again, our competitive advantage. And I hear one of the things that we work on a lot at CMAP is that nexus of transit and land use. And if you aren't thinking about supportive land use that helps create that healthy transit center around the station, you're really missing an opportunity. And it's hard to serve communities that have housing that is spread out. And then when you think about sort of the nature of households and low-income households, in the city of Chicago, Black residents across our region spend the most time of all races in terms of travel to jobs. And, I think, again, if we were to think about the policies and investments that help us right that wrong, it really is about using those places and understanding the data where we have lacked investment and focusing, again, reframing, reorienting the investment to be in places where we have the data to show that just happens, that's the case, that's how the communities have built, and we can fix that with tools like this.
Can I add on to that, Darlene?
Of course.
Yeah, no, thank you, Aaron, for mentioning that. And this is a great question. I mean, I think about us in the West Side and Garfield Park in particular. I mean, the Urban Institute came out with a study that showed the two stops in Garfield Park, a blue line stop and a green line stop, retained the highest ridership during the first year of the pandemic. So it's time to double down. I mean, and serving the working poor and on their on ridership, on transit. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the transit system. They rely on it the most. They take advantage of the most. And that I thought that Urban Study Institute is something that we talk about in the neighborhood. Another thing that comes up in the neighborhood, to your question, Darlene, beyond just housing and transit, is just the rider experience. How are we improving the rider experience and for residents? So they rely on it, they value it, but it's something that often comes up in the neighborhood is just improving the rider experience.
Well, and if I could hop back in for one more minute, Mike, when you're talking about sort of the stations that saw the highest ridership throughout the pandemic were places that helped keep our hospitals open, keep our grocery stores open, right? And some of the policy things that need to be thought about, I think, as we look to the future, is there are embedded in state statute and other laws and policies across the country, right, that especially in our region, there is a fare box recovery ratio for transit. So in order to operate transit, the transit users have to pay for half of the operating costs with their fares. And there are other ways that we could be thinking about solving for how do you continue to keep people on transit, but you have to sort of blow up the old formulas and revalue sort of the economic activity that happens because people can take transit to jobs that sustain our economy and sustain lives and have been doing that throughout the pandemic. So I think that's a real big opportunity for us to have a discussion around as we look at tools like this and how it sort of daylights a lot of this data and information.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, like this connection between like ETOD travel and jobs. And you mentioned, Aaron, before that there's data showing that communities of color, folks in communities of color have to travel further, to get to work. And it seems to me that if we do ETOD correctly, that could potentially change over time if we're building up and investing in our neighborhoods and communities. And that leads me to another question, which is, what are some examples of ETOD projects that also generate equitable economic outcomes in terms of bringing good jobs for BIPOC residents and community members? And Sierra, you hopped off of mute real quick to jump in, so I'll turn it over to
I'm
you.
gonna give a huge shout out to Pullman when I think about equitable development, when I think about impact. And I'll start back. I always talk about engagement. When I talk about the development, I can't not talk about the engagement piece. The community said we need jobs. The community said we need affordable housing. The community said we need to eliminate this food desert, and we need safe supervised recreation. Those were our marching orders. And I start with that because it was the community that defined what the priorities are. And it was us as a developer that responded respectfully to those needs. We didn't just think about affordable housing. We knew that was an important piece, but we knew it took job creation. It took safe supervised recreation. It took supporting existing entrepreneurs that knew that these neighborhoods, far south side neighborhoods, they could thrive in. We weren't convincing them of retail leakage. We didn't have to tell them that this is a viable neighborhood that deserves investment, deserves their dollars, deserves their jobs and attention. They knew that they wanted to be there. So instead, we found ways to support them. And so when I think about the development, the bricks and sticks. I mean, I'm a developer, and so the bricks are important, but the impact is even more important. And so with every single development that we focused on, we wanted to make sure that we can get people to these jobs. We wanted to make sure that we were tapping local talent. And so we didn't need to necessarily go far outside the neighborhood to create some impactful job opportunities. Instead, we partnered with workforce developers in the area to ensure that we had a pipeline for employment so that we can have our residents go from working wage jobs to living wage jobs. And I think with every single phase of development, we kept residents and stakeholders at the core of every decision that we made. And so if the question was, how do we get residents to the community center? How do we get residents to and from some of the industrial jobs? We couldn't just build a building. We couldn't just think about the industrial development without thinking about how can we support the residents to ensure that there's a pipeline, right, for employment and that there's a physical opportunity for them to get to those jobs. And so fast forward, we're talking about 9 years of development, over $550 million of investment, and over 1,800 jobs created in a very small footprint. And so I can't stress enough the importance of thinking about the development holistically and the importance of looking at development through an asset-based lens, right? Our communities are not problems to be solved. And I think oftentimes we think of it as such. Instead, it's opportunities for us to rethink of it, right? There are opportunities for us to leverage assets in these communities, right? And I think that's what's helped us, helped C&I be successful and respond respectfully to the needs of stakeholders and residents.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, how working on ETOD and certainly this tool can help change the narrative about what's in the neighborhood and how it can, thrive with proper investment. So I feel like the chat and our Q&A is burning up, like people have questions, but there are two more that I want to get to before I turn to those questions. And one is that if there was one thing you could change about how ETOD functions or operates in Chicago, what would it be? Mike, I'll come to you first, and then we'll do Aaron, and Sierra will let you close that question out.
Yeah, thank you, Darlene. I think walkability. I mean, I know we're challenged with that over here. We have near our transit stop, we have an elementary school, and the children were getting bumped from the right-hand turn lanes. We talked to the principal. Unfortunately, she didn't have it in the budget to put a crossing guard there, but I'm happy to report it took some time, but we got it done with CDOT. We're able to put up some pedestrian islands now to make it safer for families to go to and from school. So slowing down traffic, wayfinding signage, that's always a challenge with CDOT. We wanted to throw up some gorilla tape, and we were told, no, you can't do that. So just making it more walkable, our neighborhoods more walkable, inviting spaces for neighbors, I think would be one of the things, functions of ETOD as we move forward that I know we're all focused on improving.
Thanks for that, Mike. Erin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think when I think about ETOD as a planner, I get really geeked out about it and I'm excited about the opportunity that it brings to places and people. But I always want to recognize the fact that I don't necessarily, I do live in a TOD area, but I don't live in every TOD area, right? So I don't understand necessarily the complexities of the community when we go in and talk to them about the benefits. And I think if I could wave a magic planning wand and have everybody sort of think about these things and the benefits that transit might bring and the benefits of less parking might bring to a community, I'd love to have that magic wand. But I know sometimes it takes really long, thoughtful conversations and listening to some of the concerns and addressing those in a meaningful way. So I think, again, all these tools help us get closer to that conversation, but I want to be, just honest that we do need to do work in communities and talk to them about why these things matter, and then listen to what the community wants. So like Mike was saying, if we need to be considering the schools, right, and the safety around schools and slowing down streets and why that matters, those are really important things for us to address through this process too.
And I'll echo Erin. I think just listening to the community and understanding the priorities and recognize that we can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to ETOD developments. And it's important to be respectful. I talked a lot about my work at CNI on the far south side, but the reality is when we think about ETOD, it applies to developments that I'm doing here with CRG and with Clayco. We're talking about mixed-use, dense communities and ensuring that they are walkable to Mike's point, and where there's not an over-reliance on parking, and there's opportunities to kind of respond again to some of the community's priorities in a respectful way. That gets me excited, and I think we need to do more of that. We need to do more listening in those communities and allow them to kind of drive some of these priorities based off how they experience the neighborhood.
Yeah, and I'm going to get on my community engagement soapbox. I have the ability to do so as a moderator, but that listening to the community is key. Like, it's not a box to check. And if our institutions and firms and organizations really took that seriously, I just think the outcome would be so much better and everybody could win, right? So it's not a box to check. It's about true engagement. What resident doesn't want the amazingness that ETOD can bring, but it needs to be in line with how they feel about their neighborhood and what they think will work best. So I'm off my soapbox now. Okay, so a couple of more questions related to that though. What do you think is the single most challenging barrier to ETOD right now? And how would you remove it? Mike, I'm going to start with you.
I think we haven't experienced, we've experienced a little bit over here, but NIMBYism, I mean, just following stuff citywide, I think some NIMBYism issues, and then just an up and down vote when it comes to affordable housing project near transit. Automatic prerogatives seem like those are barriers and challenges. I haven't experienced it over here in our neighborhood, but watching and seeing citywide some of the challenges, I would say those two.
Erin, what do you think?
I think that the affordable housing issue that Mike brought up is something that just really needs a lot of talk, because oftentimes, when I say affordable, I don't always mean Section 8 housing, right? A subsidized housing. I mean housing that a teacher could live in, housing that a young student could live in affordably, right? It's that mix of, what if you get divorced and you have 2 kids? That significantly impacts your ability to own a home in the community that you're in. And I think, again, getting people to have meaningful conversations and more empathy around what that actually means, as opposed to sort of the bias that people bring to that conversation, would be important.
Mm-hmm. Sierra, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say financing and ensuring that there's robust financing tools. I feel like from an affordable housing standpoint, I sometimes feel like there's an over-reliance on LIHTC, and we know how competitive LIHTC is, and we know that it's a scarcity, right? And so when we don't have access to a robust fund, then it limits our ability to do true affordable housing. And when I say true affordable housing, I think there's something to be said about having diverse incomes, but I want to ensure that we have opportunities for very low income residents. And so they too deserve beautiful places that they're proud to live in, right? That residents are proud to live next door to. And so I think that there's something to be said about the financing tools that are available or not available at the scale that it should be to really scale up affordable housing across communities.
Mm-hmm. As you all were talking, the word like gentrification is just like buzzing in my head, and the potential or possibility for that to happen. I think Jackie started the conversation off by talking about wanting to develop these neighborhoods without displacement. And it just seems like the more you build development around transit stops, all this good stuff, you know, coming into your neighborhood, there is a concern about, you know, displacement and gentrification and people no longer being able to afford their homes. What do you all think about that? And see, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that you have to understand what you're working with, and that gentrification is not, you know, decades down the road. I think with every development, we have to understand the impact that that will have on our existing residents. And so while we're thinking about market rate housing opportunities, while we're thinking about affordable home ownership opportunities, we also need to be thinking about how do we preserve affordable housing opportunities? How do we ensure that there's still naturally occurring affordable housing available? I think it's a both and thing. And I think sometimes we get so focused on, hey, we need to just focus on creating home ownership opportunities here. Yeah, we need to do that, but we also need to think about how there's housing for those 30 to 60% AMI households. They deserve quality housing as well. That's walkable, that's adjacent to job opportunities. I think it's a both and. We can't just focus on the jobs. We can't just focus on retail opportunities or industrial opportunities. We've got to think about the housing opportunities as well, and those affordable ownership, but as well as traditional affordable housing opportunities to avoid gentrifying neighborhoods.
Yeah. Aaron or Mike, you all want to weigh in on this one?
I mean, I just starting piggybacking from Sierra's point, yeah, preservation of affordable housing to 2 to 4. So looking at our budgets, how much are we allocating to new construction, new housing versus how much are we allocating and dedicating to preservation? Again, those are legacy residents. Those are, as Sierra said, naturally occurring affordable housing. So yeah, I think thinking that through and having those conversations and making those decisions when we talk about budgets. The other thing I would just add is, where are there opportunities to do community wealth building on developments, right? Where can we develop community ownership opportunities, community investment opportunities as these new developments? I know when development first started coming over here, we were excited, but then quickly residents started saying, well, great, we got some development coming. It's just a spaceship coming in the neighborhood and there's no connection. But where is there opportunities for us to invest in this property, own these developments? And that's the kind of conversation folks are now having in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Aaron, you want to?
I'll just add in like my last, my 2 cents on this too is just like, you know, transit can be sort of a double-edged sword, right? It can really increase property values, but if used effectively with preservation strategies, the percentage of homes that households have to pay on transit and their transportation costs can be really reduced by having that good access to transit too. So it's, you know, really thinking about how you pair those things together is just so important.
Mm-hmm. So I'm coming to my last panelist question. You all aren't aware of this, but there have been some amazing discussions happening in the chat and in the Q&A, and people are, you know, asking really great questions about the tool. So I really appreciate that engagement, and really glad to be having this conversation. And thanks to Drew and the rest of the team that's like fast, you know, answering these questions. But the last one I have here is like, what's the single biggest opportunity for ETOD right now? And how do we leverage that? We got this fancy schmancy tool, you know, like we've got an ordinance that's being teed up. We seem to be like a pivotal moment. So with that, what do you think is the biggest opportunity, and how do we make the most of it when it comes to ETOD? Sierra, I'll start with you, Mike, and then Aaron, you can close us out on this.
Sure. I think there are ways to leverage some existing programs and initiatives that are underway, right? We've got to invest Southwest. If I just focus on the city of Chicago, we've got to invest Southwest. How do we complement that initiative? How do we put some vacant buildings back in productive use? How do we work with the city and the Cook County Land Bank to take over some of these vacant lots and create retail opportunities, to create affordable housing opportunities? How do we, I mean, when I think about the Pullman Art Space Project, we developed 38 units of affordable artist housing. out of 2 vacant buildings that have been vacant for over 30 years, right? And a vacant lot. And so we can think about repurposing buildings and repurposing space to create some affordable housing opportunities. But I think it does require us to leverage different tools and different initiatives underway. And I always like to talk about the financing. It's lasagna financing. It's not an over-reliance on LIHTC. It's not an over-reliance on other tax credit tools, but how do we find ways to layer different finance tools to create more holistic development opportunities and keep the community at the core of our why, right? And so I can't stress enough about these initiatives. They shouldn't operate in silos. We've got to figure out ways to kind of bring them together to benefit the city and the suburban areas more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest opportunity is just all of us that are here today and that have been working on this. I mean, it's amazing. 2019, we got started with the policy, the TOD policy. We testified in front of City Council. Later that year, there was a working group that was established. Then in 2021, we got the implementation plan. And now we're starting to see pilots. We're starting to see investment for the city, starting to see the city identify projects. 18 of their projects are ETOD projects. So it's just amazing. Now we have the ordinance. So I think the biggest opportunity is the momentum and inertia that we have as a group. So thank you, MPC and CNT and Elevate Chicago and everybody else that's been involved. It's just exciting for neighborhoods like ours on the east and west, south and west side.
Your thoughts, Aaron?
I think from my perspective, it's really layering these opportunities with the infrastructure bill dollars that'll be available. There are like 20 plus competitive programs that are going to come out over the next few years, and they're going to happen on like very regular cycles for the next 6 years. There will be Safe Streets funding for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure that will help support these TOD areas. There, transit-oriented development is eligible for TIFIA, which is a big loan program that the USDOT runs, but isn't well taken advantage of. We too have been looking at building a regional infrastructure accelerators program here and finding ways that we can successfully accelerate TOD across the region. And then again, the law does continue to have transit-oriented development planning funds available in it. So, maybe not for the one-off station, but as a comprehensive package of areas that need that support and investment. There are some, I think, really meaningful opportunities that will be coming online through our transportation dollars that can be matched with some of the traditional sort of housing and TOD funding that's available.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up. There are infrastructure dollars, that are coming and out there and available, and what better use than, leveraging them for ETOD work. So just turning and looking into the chat, a lot of questions have been answered, but one is still here, and it's talking about Metra's ETOD work. Very little housing density around Metro Union Pacific North, especially in Lake County. Are we aware of ETOD work that's happening around metro stations? Because our tool is talking about really the within the city and CTA. Thoughts on that? Knowledge on that?
I know that a lot of the communities along the Metro Union Pacific North and in Lake County do value their metro stations. I think the question is like, what's the regularity of that metro service going to be into the future if not everybody's coming into the central loop? And I don't have a crystal ball to sort of figure out what that answer is right now, but I do know that again, it's thinking about, well, maybe does MetroServe run more frequently, right? Like European trains do. And then does it help support sort of the build out of ETOD around stations? And I know that mayors across the region too are thinking about like, well, my parking lots, I used to have like a 3-year waiting list for my parking pass to come park at my metro station. And I don't anymore. So what's the developable opportunity around these stations? And I think we need to see a little bit longer into the future before we make big decisions. But I think, again, those are all going to present opportunities here in the near term related to some of the suburban TOD development opportunities.
Thank you for that. There was an additional question in the chat about updating the data in the tool. And I think Paul wanted to address that one directly. So Paul, you want to jump into the conversation? Are you there? Are you there?
Darlene, I think that's Peter.
Oh, why did I say Paul? Like Peter Paul, maybe. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just starting my video here. Yeah, so we you know, the asset map that I talked about when I showed the grocery stores and there's schools and other assets that are there, that we get a live feed from various sources, including the mapping platform that we use. And so those are somewhat updated as development happens. However, everything's, you know, got a bit of a lag in that world. The census data, the demographics, and the other data sets that we use to do some of these calculations, that all relies on the American Community Survey, which is done every year. The 5-year sample is what we use for that. So that will be updated when it comes out. Right now, these data are 2020. That's the most recent version of all of those data. That won't. The next iteration of that, the 2021 data, probably won't be out till this December or so. So we're looking at, I think we're funded for at least another year or two to keep this updated, and so that will be updated as it comes online.
Thanks for answering that question.
Sure.
I want to take a little bit of time to just close us out with some final thoughts. And, you know, we have a little bit of time to be able to do this, but we've talked about a lot of different things, job access and travel, transportation and connections to ETOD. We've talked about social cohesion in communities. We've talked about changing the narrative in neighborhoods using the ETOD tool. We talked about infrastructure dollars coming into our communities and how best to leverage them for ETOD. And so as you've been listening to this conversation and hearing questions, what are some key takeaways that you have from our conversation today, or for the work in ETOD overall? And Mike, I will start with you.
I think, you know, we hear about jobs and, you know, we've been doing a lot of work around rental assistance, both with the city and the state, trying to keep people in their homes, trying to work with landlords, getting them paid. We're in eviction court right now with residents. But I do think the connection of housing and workforce and trying to be more intentional about that is an area and direction that we would like to be more actively involved with. So if anybody is doing that type of work on the west side, you know, please reach out to us. I know that's something we're hearing from residents when they walk in. It's something after we're done helping them with rental assistance is now turning the conversation to workforce and job security. So
yeah,
thank you, Darlene.
Sierra, your thoughts? Any wrap up thoughts from our conversation?
I think it just takes all of us. I think that it's not just the housing folks. I think it's not just the developers. I think it's those that create policy. It's stakeholders. It's residents. I think it's important for us to leverage our voice and know that that's power, and really to change the narrative of communities. We have to be empowered, right? And tools like this help create the opportunity for us to make more compelling cases of why all communities deserve equitable transit-oriented development, why all communities deserve solid jobs, why all communities deserve both affordable housing as well as traditional affordable, home ownership opportunities as well as traditional affordable housings. But to think about things in a more holistic way, I think would serve us well.
I'll just add on top here is that I think the work that the Elevated Chicago group is doing is just so important to not only bringing sort of the public to the table, but also bringing those implementers to the table who need good tools for decision making, who need to, you know, have thoughtful conversations about what it means for our communities and what their policies have and haven't been successful at doing in the past, and provide them with sort of real examples of how to sort of change their existing practices. And I think just kudos to that group for bringing those stakeholders to the table. It's really important, again, to advancing this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm going to close us out with some final thoughts and a few last words and give people a couple of extra minutes back in their day. You know, as I said, I was taking notes as we were having a conversation, and some of the things that bubbled up for me are like the power of a holistic approach. Like when you look at this ETOD tool, it's just chock full of different data points and information that can be really helpful, not just to developers, but to residents, to government officials and others. It provides a holistic view of community, which I think is really powerful. And also there's something to the power of collaboration. Like this tool would not have come to full fruition without help from CNT and the MPC staff and other folks that have given feedback on prior iterations of this tool. So collaboration is really key. And then lastly, I'll talk about the power of data. Like I said earlier, there is nothing more powerful than a resident armed with data about their community and ready to advocate for the best that that community can get. So I think all in all, whether we're talking about ETOD and the tool or other things, like data is key. And we're hopeful that this particular tool will help advance equitable transit-oriented development around the city, because our neighborhoods are great and they deserve no less. So I want to thank our panelists for participating today. This has been an amazing conversation. I think the tool is really cool and I can't wait to play around with it myself as soon as we're done with our talk today. So big kudos and thank you to Sierra Boatwright, to Mike Thomas, and to Aaron Aleman. And we really appreciate your participation.